So next up we have Benjamin and Tillman to talk about the state of wiki research.
It doesn't work?
Sorry?
There is a power block. Just there. All right.
Hold on, guys.
Okay. Not on. The lights are on. Okay, all right, sounds good. Hello, everybody. So I am Benjamin Mako Hill, and I am presenting today with Tillman Beyer, who's here. Not here today, except in spirit, is Miriam Reddy, who we owe enormous credit for a lot of the work that you'll be seeing here, but couldn't be here to present. So this is not my first time presenting something like this talk. The first version of this talk was actually given at Wikimania 2008, and it's actually happened at Wikimania almost every year since. So if you've seen this before, some part of the introduction, at least, may seem a little bit familiar. So I'm an academic. I'm a professor now at the University of Washington. But in 2008, I was a graduate student, and I was starting to build a career that would involve, well, a substantial part of it studying Wikimedia projects and Wikipedia. This began when I was a student as an excuse for me to sort of get up to date on Wikipedia research. So back in 2008, I sort of set out to run a session that would, this is what I put in my description there. I hope to provide a comprehensive literature review of articles in Wikipedia that have been published in the previous year. I said I would try to provide a quick tour of the last year's academic landscape around Wikimedia and its projects geared towards non-academic editors and readers, try to categorize, distill, and describe the academic landscape as it was shaping up. Now, about 2 weeks before Wikimania, I did a search on Google Scholar so that I could sort of build the list of all the papers that I would have to read. And I found out that it was going to be 800 papers that I would have to be reading in the next 2 weeks. That works out to, in the presentation, which that year was 45 minutes long, 3.5 seconds per paper, and it got bigger after that. So we're not going to try to talk about all the research that has been done in the last year on Wikipedia, because there have been many hundreds of papers written in the last, or published in the last year about Wikimedia projects, many of them about Wikipedia. This is a list of a graph of the number of papers on Google Scholar that have been published with Wikipedia, just the term Wikipedia in the title, so it of course doesn't include all the other Wikimedia projects. And although we've sort of reached peak Wikipedia research, perhaps, there's still hundreds and hundreds of papers a year. There are a lot of other places within our community where we've attempted to document the kinds of things that our community is working on. So for example, there have been 458 tweets in the last year alone from the Wiki Research account, which covers research papers, but also research events and blog posts. There have been 81 publications covered in the last 13 issues of the Wikimedia Research Newsletter. That goes from July last year to July this year, so the kinds of things that we are sort of talking about today. There were 86 extended abstracts which were presented at one conference, the Wiki Workshop, which happened, I guess, a couple months ago now. Just a huge amount of research. So the goal here is the same as it was in 2008. It's to try to give you a summary of the kind of research that's been done in Wikimedia projects in the last year. And of course, that's impossible. So this is our sort of disclaimer side. This presentation has many issues. We're hoping to do a few things here. We're hoping to talk about important themes in research in the last year. So we're really trying to emphasize not just individual papers, although we will be talking about individual papers. We're talking about broader types of research that have been really important or emergent in the last year. We've tried to select themes and also papers that are going to be of interest to all of you, to Wikimedians. And we've made an attempt to try to talk about research that's not done by people who are here at Wikimania. So Wikimania, as perhaps you know, has a really excellent track on this year on research that I helped a little bit with organizing, but that many other people have contributed to and helped organize as well. So there's lots of great research, including by academics and other sort of scholars, about research they've done with Wikimedia that's being presented at Wikimania. And we're trying to talk a little bit about the rest of that stuff. And we also have a bias towards peer-reviewed publications, but there was a few things that are not quite finished with peer review yet, but they were so good we wanted to talk about. So with that introduction aside, the rest of this talk is going to be structured around what I like to call like a research postcard. So it's not the whole paper. It's going to be 5 minutes or so about 7 different papers. Each one will introduce a major theme in research from the last year, something that's new or important. We're also going to then very quickly try to introduce and try to summarize a paper that is representative of that theme. And then we're going to try to quickly reflect on why we think that work is important for, sort of scholarship in general and for the Wikimedia community. So get ready for 7 research postcards. And with that, I'm going to introduce, turn it over to Tillman, who will introduce the first theme.
Thanks, Mako. So yeah, our first theme is what the big theme on this conference too. It's generative AI and large language models. So that's what powers ChatGPT and many other artificial intelligence applications. And the paper we picked out is a very interesting one that tries to build basically a better chatbot. So it's called WikiChat, few-shot LLM-based chatbot grounded with Wikipedia by a team from Stanford University. It's still preprint, we have to say. But so their goal is to address this problem that large language models tend to hallucinate, right? They make up facts, convincing sounding facts, which have no ground in reality, and they want a factual chatbot. And what I do, interesting, is to so they make it to provide only information from generally a corpus of trusted knowledge. In the paper, they do this for Wikipedia, English Wikipedia. So you can just take a moment and see how far we've come. For those who remember Wikipedia being the epitome of unreliable in past years. Also, small remark, unfortunately, a lot of, or most of the papers we are talking here about English Wikipedia. There's not a lot, this year at least, not a lot of research specifically about other languages. I think some of you might know the researcher Lucy Caffey. She called this Caffey rule. When you talk about research on Wikipedia, you should always name the language, and a lot of these violate the Caffey rule here. Anyway, so back to this chapter, they want to have it grounded chatbot, but I also say they want to have it a fluent conversation, which is really important, which is like what ChatGPT does really well. It talks to you, right? You can have back and forth conversation. It knows what you've talked about earlier. And so this grounding, they say some chatbots, they do this by just repeating information, so it's true, but it's not really a conversation. And that makes it trickier, so they have to take the output. So they can't just go to Wikipedia. To back up a bit, many of you may have heard of the new Wikipedia ChatGPT plugin that the foundation published, which is really interesting. You should check it out. And that tries to just retrieve information from Wikipedia and answer a user question. And for this team here, that was not enough, because that doesn't give you a conversation. So they had to use both the LLM output and the grounded Wikipedia. So this is the whole process. It's a bit complicated, but I try to walk quickly through the 7 steps I have. So on the top left, you see the conversation. The user says, have you heard about this film, Oppenheimer? The chatbot says, yes, it's a biopic. The user says, what do you think about the casting, the actor selection? So now the chatbot has to figure out what to answer to this. And so that now there comes a split up query. It retrieves factual information from Wikipedia. It goes to several articles, the article director, the film, the main actor, but also it goes to the LLM. By the way, they use GPT 3.5 variant from OpenAI. That's on the bottom left. So it generates an answer, right? It's like, yes, Christopher Nolan is known for his meticulous casting choices. And then comes, unfortunately, that's the text in green. So this time he has selected Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks has nothing to do with the movie. Here's the explanation. So now what to do with it? Now they summarize the Wikipedia output. That's the second step. And step 4 below, they extract factual claims from the chatbot. And then comes the fact checking. So I'm glossing over a lot of details, honestly. But basically what's happened is they use Wikipedia to factually ground the chatty, conversational, pleasing reply of the LLM model. And then they put it together in one answer, refine it, and put it out. So it's a kind of involved process. They also say they had to do a lot of iteration to get this to run really well. And then I went to test it. Does it really work? Does it really prevent hallucinations? And for that, I actually went out and designed a new benchmark. So a problem with a lot of these AI papers is they evaluate factualness, but they only do it on familiar topics. And so they said do 3 kinds of familiar topics, like Albert Einstein or Capital Paris or FC Barcelona. And then tail topics is rarely heard things. So these are one 19th century personality, Thomas Percy Hidditch, who I've never heard of, you have never heard of probably, or some restaurant or whatever, which are still in the training corpus of the LLM, so it knows about it, but it knows less about it. And then recent topics. That's another problem. I think many of you know with chatbots that they have this cutoff date for training data, so they know nothing about recent events. So, and then they evaluate these 3, and they find their chatbot outperforms all baselines in terms of factual accuracy compared to, and they still preserves this conversationality that GPT 3.5 has. And that's kind of let this thing in, right? Really, Wikipedia helps you to increase the word translations to achieve factual accuracy. But I wrote an article about this in the research newsletter in the Signpost, and this got on the front page of Hacker News. I'll write about this because there seems to be a lot of interest, right, in how to solve this problem and what Wikipedia can help, how Wikipedia can help with this. Okay, lastly, I have one small footnote. Unfortunately, this is not their baseline. These are two models they say are widely used for this, so it's not arbitrary, but they did not directly compare it with ChatGPT itself or with Bing AI. And of course, ChatGPT is also not just using the bare model they're using here. It's also went to a lot of fine-tuning and correcting. So, but still, it's a pretty remarkable success, I would say. Cool. So we go to the next paper.
All right. Well, so when I introduced the whole talk, I showed you that graph of all those Wikipedia papers. And you may have been thinking, what about the other projects? Maybe all those people that used to be writing Wikipedia papers are working on Wikidata papers. And well, historically speaking, there is one other Wikimedia project that has seen a large amount of research. It is, in fact, Wikidata. Here's the missing, some part of that missing dip. There are large amounts of research being done on Wikidata, including about 100 papers a year. But historically, almost all of these analyses have been focused really on using Wikidata as a database, as a knowledge graph. They're interested in things like ontology building or knowledge graphs in general as a research source. But in the last year, we've seen a growth, really a number of papers that have really been looking and trying to study Wikidata, not just as a database, but as a community. So here's an example of one paper by Elisabeth Kutsiana and a group of people, including the senior author is Elena Simperl, who's we've talked about her research here before in previous years. They've been doing a whole bunch of research projects on Wikidata, and this is one that focused in particular on the way in which people on Wikidata are using talk pages and discussing things with each other. So the first thing that they wanted to do in order to set out to try to understand these dynamics was to look at to just extract a data set of talk page messages on Wikidata, and they were to find out how much people were talking to each other on Wikidata. And what they found was people weren't really talking to each other, using the discussion pages on Wikidata very much. They found that only 0.02% of items in Wikidata had any talk page associated with them. And they found that the numbers were a little bit higher for properties on Wikidata, and also for, and much higher on what they call sort of project chat pages. So these are more general pages where people talk about the project in general, and that makes sense. These are graphs that just show the histograms, but the y-axis is logged, which is so to suggest that those zeros are there's many more of those zeros or the small numbers. Even when the pages were used, they found that conversations tended to be quite short. These graphs show those same three categories, right? PCs, the project chat pages, and then the talk pages associated with properties and items. And you can see that they're finding that discussion lengths tended to follow a power law distribution in the sense that they were extremely unequal. There were some very large conversations, but a large proportion of those conversations like 50% of the conversations for items, 8% for properties, 16% for chats, involved a single person posting an issue, like a question or raising an issue, and then not getting a response from anybody. Only 3% of talk pages had more than talk pages for items had more than 5 messages which had been posted by people. But the authors also went past this. They didn't just sort of count things. They also actually looked at all of these, at the content of all of these messages, and they had a group of people on their research team actually take a random sample and then categorize them in terms of what people were talking and how they were talking about it. They sort of coded their data along a bunch of different dimensions, which is sort of reflected here in this little heat map. I think the important thing to take away from it I can sort of highlight the punchlines, is that the main topic of discussion was what they call sort of knowledge engineering work. And this involves all of the things around taxonomy building, how the database should be structured, how properties should be used, so on and so forth. Another thing they found, which was that although there was frequently controversy, people disagreed about things, that there was very, very little conflict. It didn't sort of, these disagreements didn't turn into broader conflicts, except in extremely rare situations, much less than we've seen in other Wikimedia projects, so perhaps good news. This is important work because it's beginning to build an understanding and helping build data sets that we can use to build an understanding of the social dynamics that are driving engagement within some of our sort of projects beyond Wikipedia, and this can be used to help support Wikidata's growth and maintenance over time. It points to some things that the community is doing reasonably well and some things that are still relatively weak. All right, research postcard number 2. All right, Tillman.
Cool. Yeah, our next paper is kind of special. So we did see a few papers about other Wikimedia projects here, including Wiktionary gets a few. But there's actually one project that gets very little attention, and that's Commons. So we're very happy to present you one of the very first pieces of social science research about Wikimedia Commons, or at least as Wikimedia Commons and Wikipedia. So it's called Unpacking Stitching between Wikipedia and Wikimedia Commons, Barriers to Cross-Platform Collaboration. And it's an interview study, a qualitative study with 32 users. Maybe we have some in the room who participated, but and people who work on, again, English Wikipedia and Wikimedia Commons. So stitching is an existing term from this field. So it's defined as a cross-platform work to build organizations, also build awareness of topical content. We'll see how they unpack this. So it's a field from the field of CSCW, computer-supported cooperative work. And they made process, production, curation, dynamic integration. We can see what this means concretely on Commons. Before I delve in, just a text. We all know Commons are like most of the room here, but it's worth to take a step back and see. It's the world's largest online repository of free multimedia files. It's they say it has more than 10.5 million volunteers. I think they count accounts, obviously not active editors, and over 77 million files at the time of the paper's publication. So about the relation between Wikipedia and Commons. They do call out that obviously the difference product, but Wikipedia is a reference work, Commons is a collection of files. The activities, Wikipedia is text editing, Commons, image uploading, annotating, metadata tagging, categorizing. A lot of you here are very familiar with this. They do point out that categories play a very important role. It's seen, that's a user quote, the primary way to organize and find files on Commons from one of the interviewed users. So what does stitching mean? There are a lot of detail. I'm not going to call all of this, but for example, it would mean you take a Commons image you want to use on Wikipedia, so you make it work by cropping it and retouching it. You might want to align the categories, so if you want to link a Commons category from Wikipedia article, you want to have the scope match, etc. So there's a lot of smaller things where this stitching shows up in everyday editing. So I was giving a lot of here, but the interesting section of the paper for us is they really call out some specific barriers that they think cause problems. So one is what they call lack of communications across networks. So they talk about micro networks of editors. That's people focusing on some task like photographers or even photographers for a specific subject, but photographing birds or architecture or concept photography. So people, they know probably who is active in that space, they give each other advice, but another example would be admins who handle deletions, copyright violations, the categorizer, etc. And also Wikipedia might have, and their thesis is these networks do not communicate well with each other. So they recommend to think about ways to maybe find new channels and They give direct recommendations to the foundation, by the way, in this paper, right? They should maybe participate in the design approach to build such channels. Another barrier is multilinguality. So, I mean, Commons is actually very multilingual in theory, right? There's a lot of translatable templates, etc., translatable documentation, policy pages, but they observe it's mostly produced and curated by English speakers. And the big problem is search. I mean, probably you guys know this, right? If you search for whatever lion on Commons, you get lots of lions. If you search, so I'm German, if I search for Löwe, the German word of lion, I get a lot of people with that surname, and then maybe one or two where someone put in the German word for lion. And that's still a fix that the foundation dimension this has this structured data on Commons product, which aims to improve this, but so this is a quote from the paper, they made little progress on Commons because many contributors simply do not know about it or did not care, or they even preferred their own quote-unquote the category-based system over a new structure designed by the foundation. And I make a recommendation here, which is foundation should consider to just incorporate the existing categories into structured data in Commons. One footnote, by the way, the paper was, this was done before there's a new search function, the image search, which went live in 2021. It has the same issues, but the interviews took place when the old one was still the default. Lastly, another barrier then is differing policies. So DECO, or the precautionary principle on Commons, which is this idea that when there's a significant doubt about the freedom of a particular file, it should be deleted as a potential copyright violation. They argue that this is kind of alienating the Wikipedians. And another example would be Wikipedia policies about verifiability, right, and citing sources, or also neutral point of view. And Commons does not have such. I mean, there might be, for example, a map that's not neutral, but that's, of course, not a reason to delete it in the Commons, right, or to otherwise moderate it. And they do not offer quite as much solutions for this, but they do call it out. There's two other barriers that we're not going to talk about in detail, but that's they talk about cross-platform vandalism. If your image gets vandalized or overwritten on Commons, you're on Wikipedia, there's no easy way to see this. That's probably also a technical problem that the foundation could address. And then just the different self-perception of the products, that the Commons as a media repository, or Commons as a media repository in itself, a bit like Flickr, or as infrastructure for the other Wikipedia products, and is the ultimate purpose of a file on Commons to be used on other products, or is it valuable in itself? Cool. So with that, I'm going to Mako for the next one.
All right. So, as Wikimedia projects have become more mature and more complex, they've become sort of important laboratories in ways that surprised me a little bit for the study of policies, rules, and governance. And I think that there was this paper by Sverre Steinsen published in the last year is, I think, a really great example of how political scientists are increasingly learning from us. So this paper was published in one of the most high-profile places in political science. It's a really great example of high-profile research. And it's a study about how the current approach to applying the NPOV policy on English Wikipedia has occurred. Now, in a more general sense, it uses sort of data from Wikipedia to describe an explanation new to political science about how political conflict can lead to changes in rules and how they're applied. So, here's the basic story. The claim in this paper is that the neutral point of view rule in Wikipedia initially, like 20 years ago, created a lot of space for what you might think of as sort of like fringe ideas. And so by fringe ideas, he means like conspiracy theories or like sort of pseudoscience, right? Because the idea was that we weren't supposed to say, like, oh, this is like the truth. We're supposed to say, well, these people say this is good, and other people, scientists say that that's kind of not true. And so they uses this example. And then increasingly over time, the argument is that Wikipedia has become, well, it's relied more on particular sets of reliable sources and been able to say things like, yeah, this is pseudoscience. So the argument is that there's this process that unfolded that there was ambiguity about how to apply the neutral point of view rule, that people sort of fought, and he sort of split these people into what you might think of in this particular case is the people that are sort of pro-fringe views and anti-fringe views, and that basically the anti-fringe people won most of these fights, the people who were not the believers in the fringe views, and that by winning those fights they gained power, and that the pro-fringe people tended to leave, and that as a result the anti-fringe position became sort of dominant, and sort of the neutral point of view rule was refined to match their ideas. So I'll give you a really concrete, the author of the paper gave us a very concrete example. Actually, he gave us 64 examples. He basically got evidence by looking at, 63 examples. He looked at the full edit histories of 63 topics that are associated with sort of conspiracy theories or pseudoscience in various ways. And what he demonstrated was that there was a pretty consistent, across these articles, a very consistent path from, so this is an example from the homeopathy article in English Wikipedia, and during the first 5 years, homeopathy was described pretty consistently as something like a controversial system of alternative medicine. And today, if you go to the article, it says, literally, homeopathy is a pseudoscience. And I think that you see very similar sort of processes that have unplayed across the other 64 articles that describe, that he sort of categorizes as being sort of like fringe or conspiracy theories. And then what he did was he went through, to unpack this process, he went through a bunch of different discussions in RFCs and things like this where disagreements where basically people were arguing about NPOV, and through that process sort of articulating this. And what he showed was that in each of these cases, people that had been present, that there were sort of these pro-fringe and anti-fringe camps, which he sort of lists as AF and PF up here, and that in all of these cases, the anti-fringe people, the people who are saying, no, we should say it's a pseudoscience, not all these sources are equally reliable, so on and so forth, that they won the arguments, and that over time, the pro-fringe people, despite having in many cases participated for very long periods of time, left. And Steinson, I should go back, sorry. Steinson argues that this is not only an important way of documenting a set of processes in terms of how Wikipedia's own policies and interpretations unfolded over time, that it provides a model for how change in political systems can happen more generally, but which is really hard to study because if you're a political scientist, you typically don't get, a data set of all the arguments that people had along the way. So I think it's a cool example of how Wikipedia is helping science and how maybe political science is also helping understand processes that are unfolding in Wikipedias as well. All right. Great. I'll hand it back to Tillman.
Cool. Yeah, so our next meta theme is bias and inequality. So there's been a lot of research on all this over the years. Really, we have had some of papers about this, and this year we had 3 quite different papers, which are each representative for some theme. So first one is basically Wikipedia as a tool to measure bias elsewhere. And for this, we again go back to large language models. So quickly, there's about 2 papers, one using the other. This is Llama 2 Open Foundation Fine-Tuned Chat Models. It's by Facebook, Meta. And they said in all the paper is called a bold data set for measuring bias in open-ended language generation. So this is actually from last month. So Facebook got quite a bit of attention last month by Open announcing its Llama 2 models. Llama. So the press says it's rival to ChatGPT, which is exaggerated, but it's been taken very seriously. It's also kind of open source, not really. I mean, we open source, we are not happy about it, but it's usable in a very wide of concept, also commercially. And they really, they are aware of all the concerns, right, about large language models and biases and other harms. So they have a very long accompanying white paper, 77 pages, with this, providing exhaustive details on the comprehensive steps taken to help provide safety and limit potential bias. And we took on a small part of the paper which is about bias, and it has an interesting use of Wikipedia. So this had an older paper from 2021, which provides a method to examine bias in various demographic categories. So it's race, gender, also religion, political ideology and profession, your job category. It's called BOLD, Bias and Open-Ended Language Generation Datasets. And it works is they take a sentence from Wikipedia articles, 24,000 different, and coffee rule, it's English Wikipedia, as you may have guessed, no other languages. So, and you take a sentence about a person and only have the intro and the verb. So in this sense, it's on February 4, 2009, David Allen was honored for contributions to dance and blah, blah. And they cut off, and they have the large language model complete this, and might come up with, on February 4, 2009, David Allen was formally charged with armed robbery. This is a hallucination, right? She didn't actually do this, or she was actually charged. And so that's one of the concerns here, right? And that especially this happens across categories, but it happens for some categories more than often, right? So the concern is like, for example, African Americans might be associated with crime more, and then the LLM would like do this negative prompt. So yeah, the completed prompt is evaluated. That's the bottom part in red, by some other languages, and by sentiment especially. So obviously charged with armed robbery is negative, and honored for your contribution is positive. And then you go and look how often this creation of negative text happens, or how the average score is, and if it happens more often for people in some specific social group, for example, women, African Americans, Islam, Muslims, etc., then you have evidence for bias in that language change model. So we're talking about the current application, but quickly go back to this author paper who provided this method also, and compared to Wikipedia, and they said that actually language model data back then all had more biases than Wikipedia itself. So there's also, I talk a lot about our biases, and of course they're pretty serious, but there's also, might still in some cases be better than in other places. So here's how to apply this in the last month's paper by Facebook, by Meta. This is an easier case. This is a gender bias, easier to compare. So what you see in this table is American actors and actresses, so one specific profession, right, compared. And so you see in the rows particular models. So like Falcon is another open source model, and Llama is their own models. And then you see these numbers. These are the average sentiment scores. So remember, 0 is neutral, -1 is the most negative one. And you see they hover like all in positive, but there are differences. And actually, in this case, the actresses got higher sentiments. So this is kind of anti-male discrimination, if you will. But in either way, this is the fine-tuning. So fine-tuning is a step where you take your large language model and try to improve it, remove all these biases, toxicity, safety, which OpenAI also did with ChatGPT, and they said reduce this difference between these groups. So reduce bias, basically. So here's the same thing for race, which looks a bit more complicated, just because there's 4 different groups. And by the way, I have to take back another paper that talks about the problems of defining something like race or so. And to say they defined, some of you might notice the Wikipedia doesn't actually have a lot of categories race, so they just went to articles like lists of African Americans or lists of Italian Americans. So these were the European Americans that you see there. And so these make up the data sets. And again, ask all these large language models to complete the prompts from Wikipedia, take the sentiment, the average, and see what happens. And they say for the demographic of Asian Americans and Hispanic Latin Americans have a relative higher positive sentiment than African Americans, but also actually European Americans, which you may not have expected. And the important thing is you can, by fine-tuning, you reduce this disparity, right? So it's less of a social bias. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, they didn't go back and test it again on Wikipedia like this earlier paper did, right? But still, I mean, at least we can see that Wikipedia plays a very important role in figuring out bias. And like a lot of choices on Wikipedia, like which article subject we cover, right? What statements we include in articles. These are what give us prompts, and how we record demographic groups, etc. These all go directly into this evaluation, And this large language model might look pretty different if you had made different choices. Lastly, this is more important, but also this for politics and religion. For politics, the liberal and conservative tend to have the highest positive sentiments. And there's one group that's being discriminated against, it seems, which is fascists, who have negative scores. And of course, I also can ask, was this the kind of bias we have supposed? But yeah, it shows you just how far you can go with examining this. And with that, we go to the next paper.
All right. All right. So historically, a lot of the research that is focused on bias is focused on the gender gap. Well, initially in terms of who was editing, and then it sort of shifted over time to thinking about gender gaps in terms of which articles, gender gaps in terms of the kinds of biographies, for examples, that exist or don't exist in the encyclopedia. This year, a major theme was related to comparing the content of articles that do exist in various ways. And beginning to explore and understand different kinds of bias. So this is an excellent paper by Anjali Field, led by Anjali Field, which is actually really a method, a really useful method, we think, that about measuring bias for measuring bias in exactly this kind of way. So I should also point out that this paper is special in that it is one of 2 papers that this year was awarded the Wikimedia Foundation Research of the Award of the Year. It's a backronym, so it's the WMF Ray Award. Layla, I think, is out here, the other half of the committee, so I was involved in helping make the decision, so I like this paper a lot. A really excellent piece of research. So a lot of people that are interested in measuring content bias in Wikipedia, but there are a bunch of challenges. So this is a table from the paper in question, which just explains the length of, it just shows the length of biographies for sort of biographies about African Americans, Asian Americans, and Hispanic Americans in English Wikipedia. And you can see that there's 902 words and so on and so forth. And then it shows it to a comparison class, which is what most people who have studied this done in the past. And the comparison class is just the average length for all biographies. I mean, one thing you see, so we see initially is that actually all 3 of these groups have longer biographies on average than an average biography in the encyclopedia. But there's some reasons to believe that this may not be a fair comparison. Because the kinds of things because there's not an equal number of, not every kind of person is equally represented in Wikipedia, and that there's bias in the world that shows up in terms of what kinds of things get covered, right? So for example, there are many biographies about professional athletes, and the large majority of professional athletes in the world tend to be men. And that might lead us to conclude that, and if, for example, those biographies about professional athletes tended to be shorter than other biographies, that might lead us to conclude that articles about women were longer on average. So here's their approach. To go from this world in which we're looking at all, comparing, for example, all women's biographies to all men's biographies, to one in which you're creating a very careful kind of matching. To basically go about saying, let's pick a particular biography, and then let's find the best set of matches for that particular biography. So Marissa Mayer was a CEO of a large tech company in the United States. For a while, Tim Cook is also the CEO of a large tech company in the United States. But the 2 are different primarily in terms of gender. So they come up with a method. The method is complicated and mathematical, and I'm not going to go into the details here, but it doesn't just sort of count the number of categories. It actually looks at which categories are unusual and tries to figure that out. And the punchline is that it seems to work really well. This is a picture which they use to sort of compare. It's a tool called UMAP, and it basically is a way to visualize whether or not 2 sets of things that are coming out of the process are very similar. What they're looking for here is, this is the example up here of African American articles, and it sort of represents how they sort of are situated to each other in general. This is the sort of the basic comparison case, which is essentially all biographies, and you can see that it looks a little bit different. They explore a bunch of alternative approaches that people have used, and they find that they don't work as well. They compare it to the one with the little green arrow up here, which is their method, and they find that it comes up with a set of sort of a comparison set of biographies that actually look really, really similar along most dimensions in relation to each other as well. And the comparisons themselves, I'm not going to walk you through all the number in this table. They look really different. If you look at article lengths, you find the opposite, actually, of what I showed on the first thing. That actually, each of these these groups, African Americans, Asian Americans, and Hispanic Americans, they actually tend to be they have shorter articles than comparable biographies that are unmarked in this case. If you and they see. They also find that the articles tend to be edited a little bit less, that they tend to be much younger, and that they tend to be covered in fewer other Wikipedia language editions. So they, again, worked primarily in English Wikipedia, but they actually compared coverage across all language editions as well. This work and others like it is important for a bunch of reasons. It's useful in the sense that they provided, it's actually just useful. They provided code and data for folks in the community to use. So folks that are interested in measuring concept gaps have a tool. It's also one of the very first papers to study sort of intersexual identities. So for example, race and gender at the same time. All right, and for the final research postcard, I'm going to talk about a third paper, which is about sort of inequalities as well. And this is, but it's taking a more sort of critical or humanistic approach. So, so far what we've talked about has, I think, been basically all kind of like social science or computer science, and that really does describe the vast majority of research that's done on Wikimedia projects. But there's also an increasingly a large, really great sort of humanities-based research as well. Often this work is very critical, and it's really focused less on like kind of proving facts and more on sort of like generating insights or calling out hidden power structures in various ways. And there were a number of interesting papers this year that were trying to do this. This one is very related to some of the work on inequality and bias, and we wanted to highlight it as well. It's by Michael Mandeberg, who folks may know. Mandeberg is an artist and a professor of media and culture, and also one of the co-founders of the organization Art and Feminism, which many people know is very active in working in a number of Wikipedia language editions. His paper was published in Social Text, which is really one of the best journals in the humanities. It's a really high-profile piece of work as well. And it actually started out with a pretty funny, it started out with a kind of like a funny thing. He actually set out to answer two questions which were actually pretty social scientific in their orientation. The questions were the ones up here. What percentage of Wikipedia editors are from indigenous or historically non-dominated and non-dominant ethnic groups? And what percentage of Wikipedia biographies are about people from indigenous or historically non-dominant ethnic groups, right? So he wanted to sort of understand in English Wikipedia something very analogous to the content gap in that people talk a lot about in terms of gender. He was interested in whether or not how this sort of played out in terms of like ethnic groups in English Wikipedia as well. And what he found out was that he basically couldn't answer either of these questions. And so instead, he wrote a paper which was about why he couldn't answer these questions. And they come down to the way in which race and ethnicity are encoded in Wikimedia projects and about how it affects sort of both scientists and also communities in order to be able to answer questions like that. He sort of described three main reasons, and I'll go through them reasonably quickly, but I think that they're sort of about sort of like unpacking and calling insight. The first was that the Wikipedia category system is very limited for answering questions about sort of like race and ethnicity in particular. This is just a list of the people that belong to the category people of African descent. The first person is Camus, like Albert Camus, who is French, but was born in Algeria. The third person is Amos Bronson Alcott, who is not of African descent, but was involved in the Underground Railroad, and due to intricacies of the category system, got sort of shunted into this one. There's a whole bunch of things a lot of things on this list are not people at all, and this makes things kind of challenging. The second problem he found was that and this is, I think, probably the biggest takeaway in his paper, was that being white is effectively a null category. It's simply not recorded, generally speaking, either in the Wikipedia category system or in Wikidata. So this is a description of all of the 1.8 million Wikidata items that have English Wikipedia articles and have the ethnic group property, and 38% of them are listed as African American. Not because 38% of the biographies in English Wikipedia are about African Americans, certainly not. Because people that are not, that generally speaking, white people simply don't have ethnicities, that it's sort of the default category, and so it's often just not included. Barack Obama is listed as African American in Wikidata. Donald Trump, at least from the time that his article was written, has no ethnicity which is listed, and neither does Queen Elizabeth or George Washington or Cecil Rhodes, lots of people who were kind of famous for being white in some sense. The second question that he asked was actually about editor population, and he ran into a lot of trouble with this one too. But the reason was actually very different. One reason, which is actually kind of related to all three of these things, is that people really don't agree across cultures and contexts about racial categories. They don't even really agree with themselves over time. These things shift and change over time. It's much more fluid than the way in which people talk about gender, which is also in some ways very fluid. In many places, it's not culturally appropriate or even legal to ask people about their race or ethnicity. And as a result, the Wikimedia Foundation, despite running surveys of editors every year, has never included a question about race or ethnicity in its community surveys. They did ask about ethnicity for the first time in 2020, but only for the survey that was focused on editors, only for the survey that was being given to people in the US and in the UK. Beyond that, we simply don't know. And I think that this work is a great example of humanistic research because it points it doesn't go out and it sought initially to try to measure something, but the point here is not to measure something, but to explain how something is not being measured and to place it into a broader social context. I don't think he's saying these things are bad, although I think that it provides a sort of a useful set of insights that can be used to think through how we might want to be approaching these kinds of questions differently in the future. All right, so those are the postcards and the 7 exemplary studies from the year. And of course, this is a tiny, tiny fraction of the kinds of stuff that we were talking about. And I know Tim and I have been arguing for a while now about which kinds of things. I don't know. Like it's really this is a hard process choosing from the enormous amount of really, really excellent work that is done. There's a few other really important themes that we didn't get to talk about that we wanted to highlight. There is every year just an enormous amount of work that is not sort of like as directly engaged with Wikipedia or Wikimedia projects as a community, but is using it as a corpus. So lots and lots of work in natural language processing in the last year. It's been a huge, huge area. There's increasingly often been a bunch of work which is focused on talk pages and discussions. We talked about the one with Wikidata, which looked at that as well, but I think that a lot of people are interested in discussion. And then there's a third category which was really big this year, which is people that are building data sets for other people to do research on that are essentially sort of processing and republishing Wikipedia data in some way that makes it possible or easier for people to do work. So just this morning, we saw a talk from someone who had analyzed the data, a processed data set of articles for deletion conversations and was able to do work with that as well. I think that there's a ton of other resources. I mean, this talk, happens at most once a year, but there's lots of. The good news is that there's lots and lots of other opportunities to talk about this. We can only really scratch the surface, but this is not your only chance. You should follow the Wiki Research account on Twitter or X, which will give you more than a research paper or event a day on average across the year. What?
And Mastodon.
And on Mastodon as well. Actually, I follow it on Mastodon. I should know that. There's the Wikimedia Research Newsletter, which is published as part of the Signpost, but which is available on Meta. You should check it out. The Wiki Workshop happens once a year, sort of in the around May. And is a really, really great opportunity. It was just really fantastic this year, so that's a good thing as well. There's the Wikimedia Foundation Research Showcase, and then there's OpenSim, which is an annual conference originally called WikiSim, but it's a conference on open collaboration and publishes lots of work as well. So there's just tons and tons of stuff out here. It's been a pleasure to be back at Wikimania and to be able to talk to you all about research. That's what we've prepared. Thank you very much. Questions? Oh, questions? We have a couple minutes. If folks have questions, I mean, this is a funny thing to ask questions about because we, of course, didn't do any of these papers, almost by definition. So But we've read them all very carefully. And if you have broader questions about research or getting engaged in the research community, that can be something which would be useful as well. Yeah, sure.
Hi, my name is Leila, Wikimedia Foundation research team. I just want to thank both of you for doing all this work. It's a tremendous amount of work to prepare for this presentation, and you've been doing it year in and year out. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It has become a lot easier since the newsletter has come around and since Wikimedia Research. There's lots of opportunities to do that as well, so yeah.
So I guess you spend a lot of your time looking over the sorts of research that is done. What has surprised you that isn't being researched? What would you have expected to see research on by now, and yet you repeatedly don't see?
I mean, there's some easy answers, right, which is, we always talk about commons, right, which has been, anyway, there has been a paper now, but there's a lot of smaller sister projects which don't get a lot of attention. We mentioned Wiktionary, which gets some, but it's mostly just linguists. So yeah, I think sister projects are still, I mean, obviously they get much less traffic and much less editing, but I think there's still a lot of under-researched parts there. And of course, I mean, I'm talking about not surprised, but like we said, non-English products, right? That's also a gap, and what that should mean. We should also maybe, that's what, by the way, we had new products, right? Abstract Wikipedia, Wikifunctions, that got some research, but only most from people who are building it, right? So yeah, it's maybe a bit early, but that's probably, I mean, if your question is about what should I try to research next year, maybe that might be an interesting option.
Hi, Richard, user Nosebag Bear. So we've had a whole set of really good research that obviously put together these bits here, and there've also been a fair amount, and I imagine you've seen far more of, should we say, rather poor quality research. Would you say, with the declining number of Wikipedia research but increasing Wikidata, how would you say the quality of the average research piece on these projects is going? Up, down, stays the same?
That's a great question. I think that one thing I think that's been really exciting to me is that in the last few years, I've seen it seems to be increasingly common for researchers, people publishing scholarly research, to be either community members themselves or working in collaboration, for example, with chapters. And I think that there's a kind of like mistake that just like fundamentally gets things wrong about the community just because people don't understand what's like basic things about what's going on. So they think that this is a reasonable way to measure, you know, something, but actually it totally doesn't measure that, and anyone who's been participating in the community would know it. And I think that still happens for sure. But I think that because I don't know, like there's some of us have, I don't know, become decided to study this thing that we spend a lot of our spare time on, or because people have worked in collaboration, or chapters in many cases, or different sort of groups or affiliates have reached out to scholars and to work on sort of evaluation of programs, so on and so forth. I think that work really doesn't suffer from that kind of problem. So I think that that's like a reason to be optimistic. I don't know, there's always some distribution of like, you know, better and worse kind of stuff.
Yeah, by the way, talk about like research by chapters or on Wikipedia. I think one link that I actually forgot to put in here, or should in the next, is the research projects list on MetaWiki, right? We have kept up this good habit of asking researchers to create a page on Wiki about research they're doing. Obviously, not everybody does it, but I think all the Wikimedia Foundation grantees at least. And so if you go there, you find quite a few interesting projects, of course, of varying quality too, but that's also an interesting place to look at.
Yeah. If you're a full-time professor and you study, I don't know, CEOs, I can't be like, go become a CEO. But if you're studying, I don't know, Wikidata, I can say, go contribute to Wikidata, and I do, and I think many people do as well. So we have 30 seconds. If you want to.
Hello. My question is about the first theme, generative AI, and the sixth theme, bias you mentioned before. Yeah. First, I'm a totally freshman here, so maybe it's just a personal confusion. Wikipedia is becoming a data source for many kinds of generative artificial intelligence, but we all know that there is no denying that maybe there are some biased content on Wikipedia, although it is much better than some news media. Yeah. We used to be able to find and modify this content that remains to be discussed on Wikipedia more easily. But when this content becomes the foundation database into like ChatGPT, we are difficult to find and resist. If you don't know the mechanism by this AI generate content and you don't know whether the modification on Wikipedia will have any effect on these libraries that have already been trained, should we be also be consciously cautious about Wikipedia becoming a source of data for this generative AI? Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, we can. That's a super important question. I mean, we had a whole session actually about this, or several yesterday, so you can maybe word or, but yeah, it's super important, of course, right? And I would say one thing, which is it's not always very clear how much Wikipedia influences the output of LLMs, right? It's like 3% of 5 is a corpus. So that's a pretty open research field. Actually, I'm going to post a little bit about this at Wikimedia shortly if you're animating this. But yeah, it's a super important question, of course, right? And it like really increases the responsibility we have on Wikipedia to get things right if it influences these LLMs. I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah. So we're over time, so I want to let everyone escape to the break. So thank you all for coming. We're both around and happy to talk. I'm always happy to talk about Wikimedia research, and there's a number of sessions left in the research track, the research science and medicine track, and I look forward to seeing you all there to see some of the research from being done by people who are here. So thanks everybody.
And ladies and gentlemen, we're going for a very short break and see you back here at 3:30 p.m.